Master word list. Words starting with letter C. Cabal means small group of persons secretly united to promote their own interests. For example, the Cabal was defeated when their scheme was discovered. Cache means hiding place. For example, he had cached the cash in a bag for trash. It was a hefty sum. Cacophonous means discordant, inharmonious. For example, do the students in the orchestra enjoy the cacophonous sounds they make when they're tuning up? I don't know how they can stand the racket. Cadaver means corpse. For example, in some states, it is illegal to dissect cadavers. Cadaverous means like a corpse, pale. For example, by his cadaverous appearance, we could see how the disease had ravaged him. Cadence means rhythmic rise and fall, beat. For example, marching down the road, the troops sang out, following the cadence set by the sergeant. Cajole means coax, wheedle. For example, Diane tried to cajole her father into letting her drive the family car. Calamity means disaster, misery. For example, as news of the calamity spread, offers of relief poured into the stricken community. Calculated means deliberately planned. For example, Lexi's choice of clothes to wear to the debate tournament was carefully calculated. Caldron means large kettle. For example, why, Mr. Crusoe, said the savage heating the giant cauldron, we'd love to have you for dinner. Caliber means ability, quality. For example, Einstein's cleaning the blackboards again? Albert, quit it. A man of your caliber shouldn't have to do such menial tasks. Calligraphy means beautiful writing, excellent penmanship. For example, as we examine ancient manuscripts, we become impressed with the calligraphy of the scribes. Callous means hardened, unfeeling. For example, he had worked in the hospital for so many years that he was callous to the suffering in the wards. Callow means youthful, immature, inexperienced. For example, as a freshman, Jack was sure he was a man of the world. As a sophomore, he made fun of freshmen as callow youths. Calorific means heat-producing. For example, coal is much more calorific than greenwood. Calumny means malicious misrepresentation, slander. For example, he could endure his financial failure, but he could not bear the calumny that his foes heaped upon him. Camaraderie means good fellowship. For example, what he loved best about his job was the sense of camaraderie he and his co-workers shared. Cameo means jewel carved in relief. For example, don't bother buying cameos from the street peddlers in Rome. The carvings they sell are clumsy jobs. Camouflage means disguise, conceal. For example, in order to rescue Han Solo, Princess Leia camouflaged herself in the helmet and cloak of a space bandit. Candor means frankness, open honesty. For example, Jack can carry Candor too far. When he told Jill his honest opinion of her, she nearly slapped his face. Canine means related to dogs, dog-like. For example, some days the canine population of Berkeley seems almost to outnumber the human population. Canny means shrewd, thrifty. For example, the canny Scotsman was more than a match for the swindlers. Cant means insincere expressions of piety, jargon of thieves. For example, shocked by news of the minister's extramarital love affairs, the worshippers dismissed his talk about the sacredness of marriage as mere cant. Cantankerous means ill-humored, irritable. For example, constantly complaining about his treatment and refusing to cooperate with the hospital staff, he was a cantankerous patient. Cantata means story set to music, to be sung by a chorus. For example, the choral society sang the new cantata composed by its leader. Canter means slow gallop. For example, because the racehorse had outdistanced its competition so easily, the reporter wrote that the race was won in a canter. Canto means division of a long poem. For example, Dante's poetic masterpiece, The Divine Comedy, is divided into cantos. Canvass means determine votes. For example, after canvassing the sentiments of his constituents, the congressman was confident that he represented the majority opinion of his district. Capacious means spacious. For example, in the capacious rotunda of the railroad terminal, thousands of travelers lingered while waiting for their train. Capacity means mental or physical ability, ability to accommodate. For example, Mike had the capacity to handle several jobs at once. In his capacity as president of Selectronics, he marketed an electronic dictionary with a capacity of 200,000 words. Capitulate means surrender. For example, the enemy was warned to capitulate or face annihilation. Caprice means sudden, unexpected fancy. For example, on a Caprice, Jack tried drag racing, but paid the price his father took his Chevy Caprice away from him. Capricious means unpredictable, fickle. For example, the storm was capricious, it changed course constantly. Caption means title, chapter heading. For example, the captions that accompany the Far Side cartoons are almost as funny as the pictures. Captivate means charm or enthrall. For example, Bart and Lisa were captivated by their new nanny's winning manner. Carat means unit of weight for precious stones. For example, he gave her a 3-carat diamond mounted in an 18-carat gold band. Cardinal means chief. For example, if you want to increase your word power, the cardinal rule of vocabulary building is to read. Cardiologist means doctor specializing in the heart. For example, when the pediatrician noticed Philip had a slight heart murmur, she referred him to a cardiologist for further tests. Careen means lurch, sway from side to side. For example, the taxicab careened wildly as it rounded the corner. Caricature means distortion, burlesque. For example, the caricatures he drew always emphasized a personal weakness of the people he burlesqued. Carnage means destruction of life. For example, the film The Killing Fields vividly depicts the carnage wreaked by Pol Pot's followers in Cambodia. Carnal means fleshly. For example, is the public more interested in carnal pleasures than in spiritual matters? Compare the number of people who read Playboy daily to the number of those who read the Bible or Quran every day. Carnivorous means meat-eating. For example, the lion's a carnivorous beast. Carping means finding fault. For example, a carping critic is a nitpicker. He loves to point out flaws. Cartographer means mapmaker. For example, though not a professional cartographer, Tolkien was able to construct a map of his fictional world. Cascade means small waterfall. For example, we were too tired to appreciate the beauty of the many cascades because we had to detour around them to avoid being drenched by the water cascading down. Castigate means criticize severely, punish. For example, when the teacher threatened that she would castigate the mischievous boys if they didn't behave, they shaped up in a hurry. Casualty means serious or fatal accident. For example, the number of automotive casualties on this holiday weekend was high. Cataclysm means upheaval, deluge. For example, a cataclysm such as the French Revolution affects all countries. Catalyst means agent which brings about a chemical change. For example, many chemical reactions cannot take place without the presence of a catalyst. Catapult means slingshot, a hurling machine. For example, airplanes are sometimes launched from battleships by catapults. Cataract means great waterfall, abnormality. For example, she gazed with awe at the mighty cataract known as Niagara Falls. Catastrophe means calamity, disaster. For example, the 1906 San Francisco earthquake was a catastrophe that destroyed most of the city. Catcall means shout of disapproval. For example, every major league pitcher has off days during which he must learn to ignore the catcalls and angry hisses from the crowd. Catechism means book for religious instruction. For example, he taught by engaging his pupils in a catechism until they gave him the correct answer. Categorical means without exceptions, unqualified, absolute. For example, though the captain claimed he was never sick at sea, he finally had to qualify his categorical denial. He was hardly ever sick at sea. Cater to means supply something desired. For example, the chef was happy to cater to the tastes of his highly sophisticated clientele. Catharsis means purging or cleansing of any passage of the body. For example, Aristotle maintained that tragedy created a catharsis by purging the soul of base concepts. Catholic means broadly sympathetic, liberal. For example, he was extremely Catholic in his taste and read everything he could find in the library. Caucus means private meeting of members of a party to select officers. For example, at the opening of Congress, the members of the Democratic Party held a caucus to elect the majority leader of the House and the party whip. Caulk means make watertight by filling in cracks. For example, Jack had to caulk the tiles in the shower stall to stop the leak into the basement below. Causal means implying a cause and effect relationship. For example, the psychologist maintained there was a causal relationship between the nature of one's early childhood experiences and one's adult personality. Caustic means burning, sarcastically biting. For example, the critic's caustic remarks angered the hapless actors who were the subjects of his sarcasm. Cavalcade means procession, parade. For example, as described by Chaucer, the cavalcade of Canterbury pilgrims was a motley group. Cavalier means offhand or casual, haughty. For example, the disguised prince resented the cavalier way in which the palace guards treated him. Cavil means make frivolous objections. For example, it's fine when you make sensible criticisms, but it really bugs me when you cavil about unimportant details. Cede means yield to, surrender formally. For example, eventually the descendants of England's Henry II were forced to cede their French territories to the King of France. Celebrated means famous, well-known. For example, thanks to their race to break Roger Maris's home run record, Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire are two of America's most celebrated baseball players. Celerity means speed, rapidity. For example, Hamlet resented his mother's celerity in remarrying within a month after his father's death. Celestial means heavenly. For example, she spoke of the celestial joys that awaited virtuous souls in the hereafter. Celibate means unmarried. For example, the perennial bachelor vowed to remain celibate. Censor means person who reads to eliminate inappropriate remarks. For example, soldiers dislike having their mail read by a censor but understand the need for this precaution. Censorious means critical. For example, censorious people delight in casting blame. Censure means blame, criticize. For example, the senator was censured for behavior inappropriate to a member of Congress. Centigrade means measure of temperature. For example, on the centigrade thermometer, the freezing point of water is 0 degrees. Centrifugal means departing from the center. For example, many automatic drying machines remove excess moisture from clothing by centrifugal force. Centripetal means tending toward the center. For example, does centripetal force or the force of gravity bring orbiting bodies to the Earth's surface? Centurion means Roman army officer. For example, because he was in command of a company of 100 soldiers, he was called a centurion. Cerebral means pertaining to the brain or intellect. For example, the content of philosophical works is cerebral in nature and requires much thought. Cerebration means thought. For example, mathematics problems sometimes require much cerebration. Ceremonious means marked by formality. For example, ordinary dress would be inappropriate at so ceremonious an affair. Certitude means certainty. For example, though there was no certitude of his getting the job, Lou thought he had a good chance of doing so. Cessation means stoppage. For example, the airline's employees threatened a cessation of all work if management failed to meet their demands. Cession means yielding to another. For example, the cession of Alaska to the United States is discussed in this chapter. Chafe means warm by rubbing, make sore. For example, chilled, he chafed his hands before the fire. Chaff means worthless products of an endeavor. For example, when you separate the wheat from the chaff, be sure you throw out the chaff. Chaffing means bantering, joking. For example, sometimes Chad's flippant, chaffing remarks annoy us. Chagrin means vexation, disappointment. For example, embarrassed by his parents' shabby, working-class appearance, Doug felt their visit to his school would bring him nothing but chagrin. Chalice means goblet, consecrated cup. For example, in a small room adjoining the cathedral, many ornately decorated chalices made by the most famous European goldsmiths were on display. Chameleon means lizard that changes color in different situations. For example, like the chameleon, he assumed the political thinking of every group he met. Champion means support militantly. For example, Martin Luther King, Jr. won the Nobel Peace Prize because he championed the oppressed in their struggle for equality. Chaotic means in utter disorder. For example, he tried to bring order into the chaotic state of affairs. Charisma means divine gift, great popular appeal of a political leader. For example, political commentators have deplored the importance of a candidate's charisma in these days of television campaigning. Charlatan means quack, pretender to knowledge. For example, when they realized that the wizard didn't know how to get them back to Kansas, Dorothy and her companions were indignant that they'd been duped by a charlatan. Chary means cautious, sparing or restrained about giving. For example, a prudent, thrifty New Englander, DeWitt was as chary of investing money in junk bonds as he was chary of paying people unnecessary compliments. Chasm means abyss. For example, they could not see the bottom of the chasm. Chassis means framework and working parts of an automobile. For example, examining the car after the accident, the owner discovered that the body had been ruined but that the chassis was unharmed. Chaste means pure. For example, her chaste and decorous garb was appropriately selected for the solemnity of the occasion. Chasten means discipline, punish in order to correct. For example, whom God loves, God chastens. Chastise means punish. For example, I must chastise you for this offense. Chauvinist means blindly devoted patriot. For example, a chauvinist cannot recognize any faults in his country, no matter how flagrant they may be. Check means stop motion, curb or restrain. For example, thrusting out her arm, Ranma checked Bobby's lunge at his sister. Checkered means marked by changes in fortune. For example, during his checkered career he had lived in palatial mansions and in dreary boarding houses. Cherubic means angelic, innocent-looking. For example, with her cheerful smile and rosy cheeks, she was a particularly cherubic child. Chicanery means trickery, deception. For example, those sneaky lawyers misrepresented what occurred, made up all sorts of implausible alternative scenarios to confuse the jurors, and in general depended on chicanery to win the case. Chide means scold. For example, Grandma began to chide Stephen for his lying. Chimerical means highly unrealistic, imaginative. For example, as everyone expected, Ted's chimerical scheme to make a fortune by raising ermines in his backyard proved a dismal failure. Chisel means wedge-like tool for cutting. For example, with his hammer and chisel, the sculptor chipped away at the block of marble. Chisel means swindle or cheat, cut with a chisel. For example, that crook chiseled me out of $100 when he sold me that marble statue he'd chiseled out of some cheap hunk of rock. Chivalrous means courteous, faithful, brave. For example, chivalrous behavior involves noble words and good deeds. Choleric means hot-tempered. For example, his flushed, angry face indicated a choleric nature. Choreography means art of representing dances. For example, Merce Cunningham has begun to use a computer in designing choreography. Chortle means chuckle with delight. For example, when she heard that her rival had just been jailed for embezzlement, she chortled with joy. Chronic means long established as a disease. For example, the doctors were finally able to attribute his chronic headaches and nausea to traces of formaldehyde gas in his apartment. Chronicle means report, record. For example, the gossip columnist was paid to chronicle the latest escapades of the socially prominent celebrities. Churlish means boorish, rude. For example, dismayed by his churlish manners at the party, the girls vowed never to invite him again. Cipher means secret code. For example, lacking his codebook, the spy was unable to decode the message sent to him in cipher. Cipher means nonentity, worthless person or thing. For example, she claimed her ex-husband was a total cipher and wondered why she had ever married him. Circuitous means roundabout. For example, to avoid the traffic congestion on the main highways, she took a circuitous route. Circumlocution means indirect or roundabout expression. For example, he was afraid to call a spade and resorted to circumlocutions to avoid direct reference to his subject. Circumscribe means limit, confine. For example, although I do not wish to circumscribe your activities, I must insist that you complete this assignment before you start anything else. Circumspect means prudent, cautious. For example, investigating before acting, she tried always to be circumspect. Circumvent means outwit, baffle. For example, in order to circumvent the enemy, we will make 2 preliminary attacks in other sections before starting our major campaign. Cistern means reservoir or water tank. For example, the farmers were able to withstand the dry season by using rainwater they had stored in an underground cistern. Citadel means fortress. For example, the citadel overlooked the city like a protecting angel. Cite means, quote, command. For example, she could cite passages in the Bible from memory. Civil means having to do with citizens or the state. For example, although Internal Revenue Service agents are civil servants, they are not always civil to suspected tax cheats. Clairvoyant means having foresight, fortune teller. For example, Cassandra's clairvoyant warning was not heeded by the Trojans. Clamber means climb by crawling. For example, she clambered over the wall. Clamor means noise. For example, the clamor of the children at play outside made it impossible for her to take a nap. Clandestine means secret. For example, after avoiding their chaperone, the lovers had a clandestine meeting. Clangor means loud, resounding noise. For example, the blacksmith was accustomed to the clangor of hammers on steel. Clapper means striker of a bell. For example, wishing to be undisturbed by the bell, Dale wound his scarf around the clapper to muffle the noise of its striking. Clasp means fastening device, firm grip. For example, when the clasp on Judy's bracelet broke, Fred repaired it, bending the hook back into shape. Claustrophobia means fear of being locked in. For example, his fellow classmates laughed at his claustrophobia and often threatened to lock him in his room. Cleave means split or sever, cling to. For example, with her heavy cleaver, Julia Child can cleave a whole roast duck in two. Cleft means split. For example, trying for a fresh handhold, the mountain climber grasped the edge of a cleft in the sheer rock face. Clemency means disposition to be lenient, mildness. For example, the lawyer was pleased when the case was sent to Judge Smith's chambers because Smith was noted for her clemency toward first offenders. Clench means close tightly, grasp. For example, open wide, said the dentist, but Clint clenched his teeth even more tightly than before. Cliché means phrase dulled in meaning by repetition. For example, high school compositions are often marred by such clichés as strong as an ox. Clientele means body of customers. For example, the rock club attracted a young, stylish clientele. Climactic means relating to the highest point. For example, when he reached the climactic portions of the book, he could not stop reading. Clime means region, climate. For example, his doctor advised him to move to a milder clime. Clip means section of filmed material. For example, Phil's job at Fox Sports involved selecting clips of the day's sporting highlights for later broadcast. Clique means small exclusive group. For example, Fitzgerald wished that he belonged to the clique of popular athletes and big men on campus who seemed to run Princeton's social life. Cloister means monastery or convent. For example, the nuns lived a secluded life in the cloister. Clout means great influence. For example, Gatsby wondered whether he had enough clout to be admitted to the exclusive club. Cloying means distasteful, excessively sentimental. For example, disliking the cloying sweetness of standard wedding cakes, Jody and Tom chose to have homemade carrot cake at the reception. Clump means cluster or close group of trees. For example, hiding behind the clump of bushes, the fugitives waited for the heavy clump of the soldier's feet to fade away. Coagulate means thicken, congeal, clot. For example, even after you remove the pudding from the burner, it will continue to coagulate as it stands, therefore, do not overcook the pudding, lest it become too thick. Coalesce means combine, fuse. For example, the brooks coalesce into one large river. When minor political parties coalesce, their coalescence may create a major coalition. Coalition means partnership, league, union. For example, the Rainbow Coalition united people of all races in a common cause. Coddle means to treat gently. For example, don't coddle the children so much, they need a taste of discipline. Codicil means supplement to the body of a will. For example, Miss Havisham kept her lawyers busy drawing up codicils to add to her already complicated will. Codify means arrange rules as a code, classify. For example, we need to take the varying rules and regulations of the different health agencies and codify them into a national health code. Coercion means use of force to get someone to obey. For example, the inquisitors used both physical and psychological coercion to force Joan of Arc to deny that her visions were sent by God. Cogent means convincing. For example, it was inevitable that David chose to go to Harvard. He had several cogent reasons for doing so, including a full tuition scholarship. Cogitate means think over. For example, cogitate on this problem. The solution will come. Cognate means related linguistically, allied by blood. For example, the English word mother is cognate to the Latin word mater, whose influence is visible in the words maternal and maternity. Cognitive means related to the mental processes. For example, though Jack was emotionally immature, his cognitive development was admirable. He was very advanced intellectually. Cognizance means knowledge. For example, during the election campaign, the two candidates were kept in full cognizance of the international situation. Cohere means stick together. For example, solids have a greater tendency to cohere than liquids. Cohesion means tendency to keep together. For example, a firm believer in the maxim divide and conquer, the evil emperor, by means of lies and trickery, sought to disrupt the cohesion of the Federation of Free Nations. Coiffure means hairstyle. For example, you can make a statement with your choice of coiffure. In the 60s, many African Americans affirmed their racial heritage by wearing their hair in afros. Coin means invent or fabricate. For example, mints coin good money, counterfeiters coin fakes. Coincidence means two or more things occurring at the same time by chance. For example, was it just a coincidence that John and she had chanced to meet at the market for 3 days running, or was he deliberately trying to seek her out? Colander means utensil with perforated bottom used for straining. For example, before serving the spaghetti, place it in a colander to drain it. Collaborate means work together. For example, two writers collaborated in preparing this book. Collage means work of art put together from fragments. For example, scraps of cloth, paper doilies, and old photographs all went into her collage. Collate means arrange in order. For example, they collated the newly found manuscripts to determine their age. Collateral means security given for loan. For example, the sum you wish to borrow is so large that it must be secured by collateral. Colloquial means pertaining to conversational or common speech. For example, some of the new, less formal reading passages on SATI have a colloquial tone that is intended to make them more appealing to students. Collusion means conspiring in a fraudulent scheme. For example, the swindlers were found guilty of collusion. Colossal means huge. For example, Radio City Music Hall has a colossal stage. Comatose means extremely sleepy. For example, the long-winded orator soon had his audience in a comatose state. Combustible means easily burned. For example, after the recent outbreak of fires in private homes, the fire commissioner ordered that all combustible materials be kept in safe containers. Comely means attractive, agreeable. For example, I would rather have a poor and comely wife than a rich and homely one. Comeuppance means rebuke, deserts. For example, after his earlier rudeness, we were delighted to see him get his comeuppance. Commandeer means to draft for military purposes. For example, the policeman commandeered the first car that approached and ordered the driver to go to the nearest hospital. Commemorate means honor the memory of. For example, the statue of the Minuteman commemorates the valiant soldiers who fought in the Revolutionary War. Commensurate means equal in extent. For example, your reward will be commensurate with your effort. Commiserate means feel or express pity or sympathy for. For example, her friends commiserated with the widow. Commodious means spacious and comfortable. For example, after sleeping in small roadside cabins, they found their hotel suite commodious. Communal means held in common, of a group of people. For example, when they were divorced, they had trouble dividing their communal property. Compact means agreement, contract. For example, the signers of the Mayflower Compact were establishing a form of government. Compact means tightly packed, firm, brief. For example, his short, compact body was better suited to wrestling than to basketball. Comparable means similar. For example, people whose jobs are comparable in difficulty should receive comparable pay. Compatible means harmonious, in harmony with. For example, they were compatible neighbors, never quarreling over unimportant matters. Compelling means overpowering, irresistible in effect. For example, the prosecutor presented a well-reasoned case, but the defense attorney's compelling arguments for leniency won over the jury. Compensatory means making up for, repaying. For example, can a compensatory education program make up for the inadequate schooling he received in earlier years? Compile means assemble, gather, accumulate. For example, we plan to compile a list of the words most frequently used on SATI examinations. Complacency means self-satisfaction, smugness. For example, full of complacency about his latest victories, he looked smugly at the row of trophies on his mantelpiece. Complaisant means trying to please, obliging. For example, the courtier obeyed the king's orders in a complaisant manner. Complement means complete, consummate, make perfect. For example, the waiter recommended a glass of port to complement the cheese. Complementary means serving to complete something. For example, John and Lisa's skills are complementary. He's good at following a daily routine, while she's great at improvising and handling emergencies. Compliance means readiness to yield, conformity in fulfilling requirements. For example, bull-headed Bill was not noted for easy compliance with the demands of others. Compliant means yielding. For example, because Joel usually gave in and went along with whatever his friends desired, his mother worried that he might be too compliant. Complicity means participation, involvement. For example, you cannot keep your complicity in this affair secret very long. You would be wise to admit your involvement immediately. Component means element, ingredient. For example, I wish all the components of my stereo system were working at the same time. Composure means mental calmness. For example, even the latest work crisis failed to shake her composure. Compound means combine, constitute, pay interest, increase. For example, the makers of the popular cold remedy compounded a nasal decongestant with an antihistamine. Comprehensive means thorough, inclusive. For example, this book provides a comprehensive review of verbal and math skills for the SAT. Compress means close, squeeze, contract. For example, she compressed the package under her arm. Comprise means include, consist of. For example, if the District of Columbia were to be granted statehood, the United States of America would comprise 51 states, not just 50. Compromise means adjust or settle by making mutual concessions. For example, sometimes the presence of a neutral third party can help adversaries compromise their differences. Compunction means remorse. For example, the judge was especially severe in his sentencing because he felt that the criminal had shown no compunction for his heinous crime. Compute means reckon, calculate. For example, he failed to compute the interest, so his bank balance was not accurate. Concave means hollow. For example, the backpackers found partial shelter from the storm by huddling against the concave wall of the cliff. Concede means admit, yield. For example, despite all the evidence Monica had assembled, Mark refused to concede that she was right. Conceit means vanity or self-love, whimsical idea. For example, although Jack was smug and puffed up with conceit, he was an entertaining companion, always expressing himself in amusing conceits and witty turns of phrase. Concentric means having a common center. For example, the target was made of concentric circles. Conception means beginning, forming of an idea. For example, at the first conception of the work, he was consulted. Concerted means mutually agreed on, done together. For example, all the Girl Scouts made a concerted effort to raise funds for their annual outing. Concession means an act of yielding. For example, before they could reach an agreement, both sides had to make certain concessions. Conciliatory means reconciling, soothing. For example, she was still angry despite his conciliatory words. Concise means brief and compact. For example, when you define a new word, be concise. The shorter the definition, the easier it is to remember. Contrived means forced, artificial, not spontaneous. For example, feeling ill at ease with his new in-laws, James made a few contrived attempts at conversation and then retreated into silence. Controvert means attempt to refute, contradict. For example, the witness's testimony was so clear and her reputation for honesty so well established that the defense attorney decided it was wiser to make no attempt to controvert what she said. Contusion means bruise. For example, black and blue after her fall, Sue was treated for contusions and abrasions. Conundrum means riddle. For example, during the long car ride, she invented conundrums to entertain the children. Convene means assemble. For example, because much-needed legislation had to be enacted, the governor ordered the legislature to convene in special session by January 15th. Convention means social or moral custom, established practice. For example, flying in the face of convention, George Sand shocked society by taking lovers and wearing men's clothes. Conventional means ordinary, typical. For example, his conventional upbringing left him wholly unprepared for his wife's eccentric family. Converge means approach, tend to meet, come together. For example, African American men from all over the United States converged on Washington to take part in the historic Million Men March. Conversant means familiar with. For example, the lawyer is conversant with all the evidence. Converse means opposite. For example, the inevitable converse of peace is not war but annihilation. Converse means chat, talk informally. For example, Eva was all ears while Lulu and Lola conversed. Convert means one who has adopted a different religion or opinion. For example, on his trip to Japan, though the president spoke at length about the virtues of American automobiles, he made few converts to his beliefs. Convex means curving outward. For example, he polished the convex lens of his telescope. Conveyance means vehicle, transfer. For example, during the transit strike, commuters used various kinds of conveyances. Conviction means judgment that someone is guilty of a crime. For example, even her conviction for murder did not shake Peter's conviction that Harriet was innocent of the crime. Convivial means festive. For example, the convivial celebrators of the victory sang their college songs. Convoke means call together. For example, Congress was convoked at the outbreak of the emergency. Convoluted means coiled around, involved, intricate. For example, his argument was so convoluted that few of us could follow it intelligently. Copious means plentiful. For example, she had copious reasons for rejecting the proposal. Coquette means flirt. For example, because she refused to give him an answer to his proposal of marriage, he called her a coquette. Cordial means gracious, heartfelt. For example, our hosts greeted us at the airport with a cordial welcome and a hearty hug. Cordon means fortifications to prevent access. For example, the police cordon was so tight that the criminals could not leave the area. Cornucopia means symbol of abundance. For example, the encyclopedia salesman claimed the new edition was a veritable cornucopia of information, an inexhaustible source of knowledge for the entire family. Corollary means consequence, accompaniment. For example, brotherly love is a complex emotion, with sibling rivalry its natural corollary. Coronation means ceremony of crowning a queen or king. For example, when the witches told Macbeth he would be king, they failed to warn him he would lose his crown soon after his coronation. Corporeal means bodily, material. For example, the doctor had no patience with spiritual matters. His job was to attend to his patients' corporeal problems, not to minister to their souls. Corpulent means very fat. For example, the corpulent man resolved to reduce. Correlation means mutual relationship. For example, he sought to determine the correlation that existed between ability in algebra and ability to interpret reading exercises. Corroborate means confirm, support. For example, though Huck was quite willing to corroborate Tom's story, Aunt Polly knew better than to believe either of them. Corrode means destroy by chemical action. For example, the girders supporting the bridge corroded so gradually that no one suspected any danger until the bridge suddenly collapsed. Corrosive means eating away by chemicals or disease. For example, stainless steel is able to withstand the effects of corrosive chemicals. Corrugated means wrinkled, ridged. For example, she wished she could smooth away the wrinkles from his corrugated brow. Cosmic means pertaining to the universe, vast. For example, cosmic rays derive their name from the fact that they bombard the Earth's atmosphere from outer space. Cosmopolitan means sophisticated. For example, her years in the capital had transformed her into a cosmopolitan young woman highly aware of international affairs. Coterie means group that meets socially, select circle. For example, after his book had been published, he was invited to join the literary coterie that lunched daily at the hotel. Countenance means approve, tolerate. For example, he refused to countenance such rude behavior on their part. Countenance means face. For example, when Jose saw his newborn daughter, a proud smile spread across his countenance. Countermand means cancel, revoke. For example, the general countermanded the orders issued in his absence. Culvert means artificial channel for water. For example, if we build a culvert under the road at this point, we will reduce the possibility of the roads being flooded during the rainy season. Cumbersome means heavy, hard to manage. For example, he was burdened down with cumbersome parcels. Cumulative means growing by addition. For example, vocabulary building is a cumulative process. As you go through your flashcards, you will add new words to your vocabulary, one by one. Cupidity means greed. For example, the defeated people could not satisfy the cupidity of the conquerors, who demanded excessive tribute. Curator means superintendent, manager. For example, the members of the Board of Trustees of the museum expected the new curator to plan events and exhibitions that would make the museum more popular. Curmudgeon means churlish, miserly individual. For example, although he was regarded by many as a curmudgeon, a few of us were aware of the many kindnesses and acts of charity that he secretly performed. Cursive means flowing, running. For example, in normal writing we run our letters together in cursive form. In printing, we separate the letters. Cursory means casual, hastily done. For example, because a cursory examination of the ruins indicates the possibility of arson, we believe the insurance agency should undertake a more extensive investigation of the fire's cause. Curtail means shorten, reduce. For example, when Herb asked Diane for a date, she said she was really sorry she couldn't go out with him, but her dad had ordered her to curtail her social life. Cynical means skeptical or distrustful of human motives. For example, cynical from birth, Sidney was suspicious whenever anyone gave him a gift with no strings attached. Cynosure means the object of general attention. For example, as soon as the movie star entered the room, she became the cynosure of all eyes. End of the word list with words starting with letter C.